It doesn't matter whether you're an elite athlete or a weekend warrior, a rock climbing injury can happen at any time. And today, we're going to talk about how I went from a torn A2 finger pulley to sending V13 in 3 months. Welcome back. My name's Tighe, and I'm a rock climber living in Madrid. On this channel, we share sim footage along with videos about life in Spain. If that's something that interests you, make sure to click subscribe so you can follow along with us. And stick around to the end of this video for uncut sim footage of the V13 I sent 3 months post-injury. So on August 6th of this year, I heard the dreaded popping noise in my right ring finger while I was trying to send a boulder problem. Leading up to the moment when the injury actually happened, I didn't really have any warning signs. I had been climbing really strong all summer in our local climbing areas. We were doing a lot of climbing on pockets in Tamajón and doing some granite slab climbing in an alpine area near Madrid called Valsaín. And I had been sending some V9s, V10s, projecting in really close on a couple of V11s. And a few days before the injury, we had gone to Catalunya to pick up a bed platform for our new van. And while in Catalunya, we checked out 2 bouldering areas, Montroig and Montral. And in both areas, I was able to send a V10 and a V9 in just a session. So I was feeling really strong, didn't really have any aches or pains in any parts of my body. And then we started our climbing holidays over in La Rona. It's a limestone bouldering area located just on the border between Navarra and Basque Country. The day that it happened, I was trying an 8A called Variant. And it's a really powerful moonboard style problem that's just 3 or 4 moves on a 45-degree overhang. I had tried the boulder actually the day before and worked out the moves, so I returned hoping to send the boulder. I warmed up really well. I typically warm up super slow anyway, so I don't think it was a question of me being cold or not prepared to start pulling down on small holds. So I got started, I worked out all the moves, I felt super strong. I turned on the camera to give it a few sin burns, and on my second go from the ground, I made the first move from an undercling to a right hand crimp, and when I was moving my feet upwards is when I felt my finger my hand, it felt like it opened a little bit, and I heard a popping noise. I'm actually going to put the video of the send attempt where you can see the injury happen. If you don't want to see this, then just skip forward to the next chapter. Yeah, so I don't like watching that video at this point. That sound still really creeps me out. In the moment when it happened, I didn't have any pain. I really just thought that I had cracked a knuckle, and it took me maybe like 30 seconds or a minute to realize, oh, maybe something's not right. And then all of a sudden I started to feel kind of like dizzy, and I lay down for a few minutes, and I got really panicked and worried that I had done some damage, and I rested for like half an hour because I know that when you have an injury from back when I did gymnastics at an elite level, that it often takes some time for your body to react and for the pain to kick in. But after like half an hour, I really didn't have any pain, so I actually was able to continue climbing that day. I taped up my finger, thinking that maybe I had done something to it, and I was able to work out actually all the moves of a 7C plus right behind the 8A called Uno que no llega. At that point, I still had no pain in the finger whatsoever, but right away I noticed that there was no strength in my right ring finger, so I knew something was kind of wrong. The next day, I came back to the same sector because I had worked out all the moves of the 7C plus, and I didn't have any pain at this point, but As it was the second day, I was starting to notice that I had no strength at all in the right ring finger, and I wasn't able to really hold or put pressure on anything that put my hand in a crimp. So I was still pretty good in open hand, and I was able to work out some new beta to only get the holds with an open hand and 3-finger drag grip. And I actually was able to send the 7C plus that day. So day 1 after injury, I felt really good. And then is when the fear started kicking in. The first few days after the injury, I actually woke up a couple times in the middle of the night, and I was hearing this popping noise, and I was imagining that my finger had broken off. Coming from a background of being an elite gymnast, where I had seen a lot of very traumatic injuries. I've seen knees blown out, torn biceps, broken bones, but I personally never had an injury that had a loud cracking noise. So for this to happen to me, it was really traumatic and difficult to accept. After I sent the 7C boulder, we took a rest day, and then I tried to come back and climb. So this was now 3 days after the injury. And this is when I started having pain at the base of my ring finger, and if I put pressure on it and massaged the base of my ring finger, it was very tender to the touch and almost felt like there was something missing down there. My disclaimer at this point is that I'm not a medical professional. Everything that happened to me came with my own intuition from being a high-level athlete in gymnastics, and I was actually lucky. While we were on climbing holidays in La Rona, a good friend of mine, Jorge, who's a sports doctor, was also bouldering in the area, and he specializes with climbers that are recovering from injuries. So he looked at my finger and told me that I had most likely torn either partially or fully the A2 finger pulley. And his advice was to start using a ring taping method and to avoid anything that caused pain on my finger. So on day 3, day 4, day 5 after the injury happened, we went looking for slab problems, and since it was a limestone area, we were able to find problems with just 2-finger pockets. And luckily when I do 2-finger pockets, I like to climb with my front 2 and not my middle 2. So we were able to find boulders that I was able to do with these 2 fingers and not use my right ring finger at all. So we were able to do some things those first few days, although I did have quite a bit of pain even when I wasn't using it. The second week is when I noticed the most discomfort while climbing. We took a few days and went up to Tighe, which is a bouldering area near San Sebastian on the Atlantic coast, and even trying some 7A boulders with giant jugs was really painful, and I wasn't able to do a whole lot. From I guess like 7 days to 2 weeks is when for me the injury was at its worst point, and it was really tender to the touch. So let's take a look at the taping method my friend Jorge told me to use. Like I mentioned, it was a ring style bandage. So I have some tape here, and when I unroll the tape, it's about 1 centimeter in width, and I give myself maybe 10 inches of tape. And then what I'll do is I'll start this with my palm up. I'll give 1 wrap around, and then before I close the tape on this side, I'll put my ring finger into a half crimp position, and then I'll pull the tape as tight as I can. I'll open my finger and then repeat this process. Pull it around, half crimp, pull tight, pull it around, half crimp, and pull tight. And I'll do this 3 or 4 times, and I work it from the very base of my finger all the way to the first joint. So the idea is that this taping method will serve basically like an artificial pulley, and it'll try to keep everything else in place. I started using this taping method right after the injury happened, and I'm still using the tape 3 months after the fact. Along with taping, especially if those first few weeks after injury, I was icing my finger in a cup of ice water every night and trying to do some gentle massaging at the base of the finger to help encourage blood flow. So it really took me a few weeks to accept the fact that I had actually injured my finger. I think the hardest thing for me at this point mentally was that I was already thinking about all of the projects that I had left really close to completing at the end of the 2021 season, and thinking that, oh my gosh, that I'm not going to have time to do them, and I'm not going to be able to start projecting hard until like December or January. So that was really hard for me to accept at first. In those first few weeks I was really depressed, really upset, and I was still climbing, but I would go and do like a V4, V5 problem, and I would find a move that should be so easy for me, and I wasn't able to do it. Or maybe another boulder that Lucy would flash, and that I wouldn't be able to grab a hold in a certain way, so instead of having a jug and an open hand foregrip, I was doing a jug with like a 2-finger pocket. So some of my sequences on these boulders were becoming a lot harder. You know, we as climbers, we try not to think about the numbers and the grades when you do climbs, but at the same time, you go from one level of climbing and then you get an injury and you're going down levels. It was really hard for me to accept that mentally. We finished out our vacations in La Rona and then returned to Madrid, and this is when I started to feel a bit more motivated with climbing. By this point we were on week 3, almost week 4. And in Madrid we have access to some limestone bouldering where there's a lot of pockets, Tamajon and Patones. That's where we spent pretty much the entire month of September climbing, at least for me, because we were able to find a lot of pockets and holds that were able to let me do a 3-finger drag position, which at this point was starting to feel a bit more comfortable on my finger. But I wasn't able to really crimp anything yet, or if I was crimping, it was kind of like a really hard crimp on my front 2 fingers, and then the ring finger was sitting there not really doing a whole lot. The first project that I was able to do when we returned to Madrid was in Tamajon. It was a traverse called FedEx. It's about an 8A or a V11 traverse, and it did have a couple of crimp moves, but I was able to work out that I was able to take the crimps with my front 2 fingers and not use my right ring finger. I was able to do that pretty quickly. And then I started working a project that I had tried at the end of June and July called Tomajon. It's an 8B plus problem. This was my first project back after the injury. Started working this towards the end of September or early October. And even though it's a really high level boulder problem, all the moves were 3 fingers open or 2-finger pockets. So what Lucy and I did at this point, there were a few moves on this boulder that were painful for me, or I was scared to do, that I noticed that I didn't have the strength in the finger like I did before. Is Lucy would power spot me through the moves, and living close to these bouldering areas, it was really cool to notice we'd go one Saturday and then return a week later, and I was able to feel not only the gain in strength in my finger, but also mentally gaining confidence in my abilities, and that I wasn't going to have the injury happen again. By the early part of October, I was able to do all the moves of Tomajon by myself. At that point of early October, the temperatures had gone down enough that we were able to start doing some granite bouldering. Luckily, La Pedriza, which is our local crag, it's very crimpy, but the crimps aren't as demanding as they tend to be on limestone. And a lot of times, even though it's like a perfectly flat edge, I can use my open hand foregrip, which is one of my strongest grips, so it leaves my ring finger a bit more open than having to go to limestone, where a lot of the times they force your hand into a full crimp or a half crimp, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. So we started going to La Pedriza, and we did a lot of kind of slab and vertical boulders, and just taking things really slow. And then at the midpoint of October, around my birthday, so like October 15, 16, 17, I did a 7C plus called Pendant's Roof. It's an overhang, and it starts with 2 crimps and a right toe hook. You lift off the ground off the first 2 crimps, you get a left hand pinch, and then make a big move to a right hand crimp, move your toe hooks up the rail, and then make a big huck move to a jug. This took me a couple days to do, but it was the first problem that I was really having to crimp on the right hand. And you know, through this whole process, what I've noticed happening is that I had to accept that the injury didn't allow me to grab holds like I normally would, so I was often looking for ways to, instead of taking a crimp straight on, I would take it a bit sideways so I could let my fingers stay a bit more open. Or I was looking for alternative beta sequences that would allow me to put less pressure on my hands. After I sent Pin Inch Roof, the following week I returned to a project that I had left super close to sending at the end of last season, called Wild Wild West. It's an 8B in La Pedriza. And at the end of last year, at the end of March, I had done all of the hard moves and had my hands in the final 2 jugs before starting the last 7A traverse part of the problem, and a foot popped off and I dabbed the rock that was behind me. And unfortunately I wasn't able to get good friction at that point of the year again, so I had to leave it all summer. And the first day when I returned, at the end of October, Lucy had to power spot me through 3 of the moves. So there were 3 moves that I wasn't able to do myself 1 week after, and this time I was able to work out all the moves myself, but still didn't feel like my finger was ready to handle it. Now we're at the end of October, and Lucy and I decided that we would clear our minds a bit from projecting in Madrid, and we went up to Tighe, which is a granite bouldering area in the French Pyrenees Mountains, right on the French and Spanish border. This was great because it allowed me to get away from some of the projects I was starting to think about here in Madrid. And Tighe is very crimpy, and I was able to do 2 double-digit boulders while I was there, so as whole and uniformicide. So I think that really helped me build confidence, especially when you think about the fact that I was able to do the boulders in either 1 or just 2 short sessions. That gave me a lot of confidence in my finger. After we finished our week up in Tighe, France, we came back to Madrid, and actually the very next day is when I sent Wild Wild West in La Pedriza. So this came as a huge surprise. I wasn't expecting to send the boulder that day, but I think, I got lucky with the friction. The friction was really good, and I had the sequence really dialed from the last season. And one of those days when you go without any expectations and things just fall into place. Let's go ahead and take a look at the uncut sim footage of Wild Wild West in La Pedriza.
Venga. Venga. Muy bien. Venga. Venga, muy bien. Muy bien. Fuerte, 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 fuerte. Muy bien, fuerte aquí. Fuerte el pie. Venga, muy bien, Alex. Venga, Venga, muy bien. Venga,
Madre de Dios.
Jejeje.
No lo puedo creer. Madre mía.
Reflecting on this entire process of going from injury to denial to acceptance to a partial, if not full, recovery, I think it's true that I did gain a lot of strength in my front 2 fingers, but more importantly, and a very positive of this whole process, is that I think that it's opened my mind to search for other techniques instead of just looking for some sim footage from a friend and trying to copy beta. It made me think outside the box in many cases and try to find solutions to do certain moves so that there was less weight on my hands. And I definitely feel like it's helped me think a bit more creatively to find beta. So that's a huge positive. Would I say that my rock climbing injury recovery process is finished? No, because there's still some movements that put an uncomfortable pressure on my finger and I'm still taping. However, I think I'm well on my way to making a full recovery. Of course, finger injuries are going to be different for every single climber. Mine was very concentrated, a sharp pain near the A2 pulley at the bottom of my ring finger. It didn't go down into the palm of my hand or even the forearm. But what I want to share with you guys is that yes, finger injuries suck, but they're also not the end of the world. We have 10 fingers, and if you're down one finger, you still got 9 left. So use this moment to think outside the box and see if there's a way you can improve other parts of your climbing. If you have an injury that's severe, maybe you can use this time to work on your core strength or your leg strength. If you're able to continue climbing like I was, use this time to work on your footwork and try some slabs, or go looking for climbs that allow you to do things with just your 2 fingers and avoid the injured finger. So yeah, just take advantage of this moment and try to look for the positives, because in the long run, it might actually help you. I hope you found this video helpful and motivating. If you have questions about rock climbing finger injuries or my recovery process after a torn A2 finger pulley, leave those in the comments down below. And until next time, happy climbing!